first guest is a strategic foresight practitioner. In plain language, this means he spends his days helping companies and governments envisage various likely scenarios of how the future might unfold. Since the magical technology of crystal balls appears to have been lost in time, he relies on imagination and sophisticated technical tools. And it just so happens that last year, he and his team ran a series of pandemic preparedness scenarios for the government. Please welcome Kacper Nosarzewski. Kacper, can you tell us—
Ralph, good evening, everyone. Hi.
Can you tell us what you found when you ran those various scenarios? Is it unfolding more or less as you envisaged?
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, for the purpose of doing scenarios and strategic foresight is never to have a more precise or even more precise forecast. Strategic foresight comes to terms with the fact that future cannot be predicted, that you cannot have a very accurate prediction. So it's better to have several models of a future that are rather likely, they are more probable than not, and that do not differ very much between themselves in probability, so that they all seem likely, they all seem plausible, they all seem realistic, and you feed these different models of the future, so these different scenarios, to a decision maker or to a community of decision makers or policy makers, and you try to reframe their thinking about economic phenomena, social phenomena, resilience, like we are testing it here and now with the COVID pandemic. You're trying to reframe them and see if they can come up with some new questions, or if they can come up with some new strategies or plans that are more flexible and that are beyond the status quo of what is accepted as standard policy or as—
Did they do that?
Well, of course, yes. Foresight has been around for 60 to 70 years already, and it started with the military industrial conglomerates of the United States, with the US Air Force and Rand Corporation. So in the beginning, it advised military and defense technology spending and investment in the United States, but because it works, it has since been adopted by big corporations and by governments as well. So the same people who laid foundations of my discipline of strategic foresight with methods such as the Delphi method, the scenario analyses, and many more, they have then filtered, they have then transferred these techniques and methods to the civilian world, and they have worked rather well. The constant demand for our services, 4CF is the only such company in Poland that specializes in this serious gaming Delphi scenarios for decision making, that really advises policymakers, really advises corporate decision makers on the strategic choices. Well, these methods are the demand for them is rather constant and growing, because there is the right feeling, that there is the right premonition, even in amongst the decision makers, that the future may really become very wild and may surprise us in many ways. So it's better to avoid the avoidable surprises, allowing for the very unexpected for wildcards to materialize, but being more or less aware of the possibilities and of the things that are likely. And the global pandemic was likely for at least the last 20 or 30 years. In a report by an American think tank, the Millennium Project, that 4CF, my company, represents in Poland, published in 1997, the first State of the Future report, first or second edition of the State of the Future report, emphasized that there is a consensus between epidemiologists all over the world and virologists that a global pandemic of influenza or of another affliction is going to materialize sooner or later. A really significant epidemiologic event with pandemic reverberations, with pandemic consequences. So for the scientists who study the spread of viruses, how they mutate, how they evolve, how they move around, how they cause illnesses, it has been a given already that this is going to happen someday. Of course, no one exactly knew because of the biological, the microbiological, the evolutionary characteristics of how these microorganisms evolve and how the illnesses they cause evolve. Nobody could predict for certain when exactly it was going to happen. This is why when we were doing this scenario exercise last year with the Polish Ministry for Infrastructure and Investment, who has now its successor is the Ministry for Development and Ministry for State Assets, we decided, even though we were challenged and we were discouraged from doing this, to use the global pandemic as one of the 3 scenarios that we are going to present. And this was, to some, it seemed like an odd one, because it was not about climate change as such, it was not about biodiversity, it was not about national security threats or military security threats. It was about a possible outbreak of a novel virus in Asia. We were, of course, targeting a different country with a different affliction because we were looking at influenza and its consequences, and the ground zero being India and cattle being an important factor in all this. So in one way, you could say we got it all wrong. We also timed it for the second half of the coming decade. But these are all, parts of a model that is not predictive. It does not convey our forecast when some event will take place exactly, or whether we feel that this event is good or bad. This is a mental model that is meant to stress test the imagination, just as you mentioned, Ralph, the imagination of decision makers, and work as a wake-up call for them, saying, okay, you're so embroiled, you're so much into the trenches of the current campaign. You're always fighting the problems of yesterday. You never spend enough time preparing for tomorrow. Well, until you do, until you get into a strategic foresight exercise, and until you stretch your mental muscle to consider a possibility that in the future, in the near future, there may be a very significant crisis, such as a global pandemic, and then we should perhaps consider its potential consequences, see if we are resilient and if we will get back into shape once it's finished, once it's over, and see how do we accommodate, how do we adapt to a new reality afterwards.
You've just summarized the next 2 hours questions very elegantly.
Well, yes, this is it. We are now into the we are in the thick of the things. Yeah, this is happening. What was a model and a reframe for last year is now a reality. So people have been asking these questions for a long time already, but now it's everybody's concern. Yeah, it's on everyone's mind. So we're
asking some very hard questions.
Indeed.
And the sort of questions that we haven't asked or but should have. Stay there, Kacper, don't go away. I know that you won't. To help us discuss these very difficult questions of the likely effects on our society and our businesses and our culture.